Close your eyes. Let the weight of your body sink into the bed, and let the air in the room around you grow heavy, warm, and thick. We are leaving the world of concrete, steel, and clocks. We are traveling back 66 million years to the final, feverish days of a dynasty that ruled the earth for an eternity. This is the story of an America you would not recognize, a continent torn in two, a land of giants breathing under a sky on fire. The Empire of Laramidia and the Liquid Heart. Imagine standing in the center of what we now call Kansas or Nebraska. Today, you would see endless prairies and golden wheat fields, but in the late Cretaceous, you would be standing on a beach. Whoosh! That is the sound of a vast, warm, and turquoise ocean lapping at a shore that has been lost to time. This was the Western Interior Seaway. It wasn't just a sea, it was the liquid heart of North America. It stretched from the tropical heat of the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the frozen currents of the Arctic, splitting the continent vertically down its spine. The America that wasn't. We think of America as a solid, unbreakable landmass, but back then there were two Americas. To the east lay Appalachia, a quiet, ancient land of rolling hills. To the west lay Laramidia, a narrow, violent, and dynamic island continent squeezed between the rising peaks of the young Rocky Mountains and the encroaching sea. Laramidia was the crucible. It was a strip of land barely 1,000 miles wide, yet it was the most crowded, high-stakes stage for evolution the world had ever seen. This was the kingdom of the Tyrant King. The feverish planet. To walk into a Laramidian morning was to walk into a steam room. Hiss! The air was thick, heavy with moisture and smelling of salt, rotting vegetation and ozone. The physics of the greenhouse. The planet was running a fever. The CO2 levels in the atmosphere were at nearly 900 parts per million. To put that in perspective, our modern world is struggling at 420. This wasn't just a warm day. This was a global greenhouse with the windows locked and the heat turned to maximum. The world without winter. We are used to the rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of ice and thaw. But in the late Cretaceous, winter did not exist. There was no snow. There was no frost. Even at the North and South Poles, there were no ice caps. Instead, there were lush, green forests of conifers and ferns growing in the Arctic Circle. Rumble. That is the sound of the planet breathing. Because there were no ice caps to lock away the water, the sea levels were hundreds of feet higher than they are today. The oceans didn't just surround the land, they invaded it. The atmosphere of a steam room. Breathe in. Gasp. The air is dense. Because of the high heat and the vast inland sea, the humidity was near a constant 100%. This moisture was the engine of a weather cycle of terrifying violence. The monsoons of fire. The rains didn't fall, they attacked. Patter, patter, drum.
The monsoons of Laramidia were torrential downpours that could last for days, turning the great river deltas into churning seas of mud. These floods were the archivists of the era. They buried everything in their path: leaves, trees, and the colossal bodies of the fallen, preserving them in oxygen-poor silt so that 66 million years later, we could find them in the Badlands of Montana and the Dakotas. Case study: the Hell Creek Formation. Every bone found in the Hell Creek Formation today is a photograph of a single muddy afternoon, when a paleontologist clears away the dust from a triceratops skull. They are clearing away the sediment of a flood that happened while the air was still thick with the scent of Cretaceous magnolias. The invisible energy. But there was something else in the air, something invisible. Because the CO2 levels were so high, it acted as a super fertilizer. Plants didn't just grow, they exploded. This was an all-you-can-eat buffet on a planetary scale. This massive abundance of green fuel is what allowed life to reach sizes that seem impossible today. The ghost in the tank.
Did you know that the fuel powering our modern world, the oil beneath the Great Plains, is actually the liquid ghost of this era? The trillions of microscopic organisms that lived and died in the western interior seaway were cooked by the Earth's heat over millions of years into petroleum. Every time you see a car drive by, you are seeing the energy of the Cretaceous sea being released back into the atmosphere. The sun is rising now over the misty swamps of Laramidia. The fog is thick, clinging to the giant ferns. Snap! A branch breaks in the distance. The ground begins to vibrate. Thud, thud. A family of giants is moving through the mist. They are heading toward the water's edge before the heat of the day becomes unbearable and before the king decides it's time to hunt. As the sun burns through the thick morning fog of Laramidia, it reveals a world that is undergoing a secret, colorful coup. This is the alien green and the symphony of the herd. Before this moment, the world was a palette of greens and browns. For millions of years, the land was dominated by ancient, stoic giants, redwoods, ginkgos, and cycads. But now, in the late Cretaceous, the ground is beginning to blush. The first colors. Imagine walking through the undergrowth. Rustle. You aren't just stepping on ferns, you are seeing the very first magnolias and water lilies. The logic flip, flowers as technology. We think of flowers as delicate decorations, but in the Cretaceous, flowers were a revolutionary high-speed data transfer system. Before flowers, plants relied on the wind to carry their pollen, a spray and pray method that was incredibly inefficient. Flowers changed the game by hiring insects. Buzz. The first bees and butterflies appeared, lured by the promise of nectar and the vibrant whites and pinks of these new blossoms. This was the world's first biological contract. Plants gave food. Insects carried genetic information directly to the next target. This partnership accelerated evolution to a fever pitch, turning Laramidia into a kaleidoscopic garden.
The modern link. Every time you see a bee in your garden or buy a bouquet of flowers, you are witnessing a relationship that was signed and sealed in the humid swamps of America 70 million years ago. the grinding machines. But a garden this massive needs consumers, and in the late Cretaceous, nothing consumed the green ocean quite like the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs. Rumbo. If you stood in the path of an Edmontosaurus herd, you wouldn't just see it, you would feel it in your teeth. This was a living earthquake, thousands of 5-ton animals moving as a single pulsing river of flesh. Biomechanics, the dental battery. Take a look at that duckbill. It wasn't soft like a bird's, it was a rugged biological harvester. Inside those jaws sat a dental battery, hundreds of tightly packed teeth arranged in rows. Grit, grind. As the dinosaur chewed, the teeth acted like a self-repairing grinding mill, pulverizing the toughest, woodiest ferns into a digestible pulp. They were the industrial processors of the Cretaceous. The world's first symphony. But the most haunting part of this world wasn't the sight of the giants, it was the sound. Meet Parasaurolophus. It carried a hollow, 3-foot-long bony crest on its head that swept back over its neck. For decades we wondered, was it a snorkel, a weapon? The reveal, the natural trombone. It was an instrument. By pushing air through the intricate hollow chambers of that crest, Parasaurolophus could create a low-frequency resonant boom that could travel for miles through the dense forests. Imagine standing in the twilight, hearing a herd of these giants calling out to each other across a valley, a haunting musical conversation 66 million years old. It wasn't a roar of anger, it was a language of community, a warning of a distant predator or a call to a mate echoing through the emerald light. The price of abundance.
But where there is a walking feast of thousands, there is a shadow. We see a herd of 10,000 Edmontosaurus as a symbol of power. But for the dinosaurs themselves, it was a symbol of anxiety. Every head lifted in unison at the snap of a twig. Every nostril tasted the air for a single metallic scent. They weren't a city of giants. They were a mobile buffet governed by a deep instinctual fear. Because in the cool, dark shadows of the conifer forests, the king was always watching. He didn't need a herd, he didn't need a song, he only needed a moment of silence. The humidity is rising, the alien green of the forest is vibrating with the hum of insects. The great herds are moving slowly toward the high ground as the afternoon sun turns the sky a hazy golden orange. Thud, thud. The ground is vibrating again, but the rhythm has changed. It's no longer the steady march of the herd. It's a heavier, more deliberate footfall. A shadow is stretching across the clearing, longer and darker than any tree. To the herds of Edmontosaurus, he was a shadow, a nightmare that brought the sudden end of a world. But to understand the Tyrannosaurus Rex, we have to leave the fear behind. We have to see him not as a monster, but as the most terrifyingly perfect piece of biological engineering to ever walk the earth. Welcome to the mind of the king. Imagine the forest going silent. Shh. The hum of insects stops. The booming calls of the duck-billed dinosaurs vanish. The air itself feels like it's holding its breath. This silence has a name. It is the arrival of the apex. The world through scent. A T-Rex didn't just see the world, he tasted it. Sniff, sniff. His olfactory bulbs, the part of the brain dedicated to smell, were the size of zucchinis. While we navigate by landmarks, the king navigated by a chemical map. He could detect the faint, metallic scent of blood from a wounded triceratops nearly 3 miles away. He could tell if a carcass was fresh or rotting just by the flavor of the wind. The GPS knows. He didn't wander, he followed an invisible trail of molecular data. If you were a prey animal, you didn't have to be seen to be caught, you just had to exist.
The instrument of annihilation. But a hunter is only as good as his kill, and the king's bite was an instrument of absolute destruction. Crunch. The bone crusher. Most predators, like lions or wolves, have teeth designed to slice flesh, but a T-Rex, his teeth were thick, conical railroad spikes. He wasn't interested in just the steak, he was after the bone marrow. Snap! With a bite force of nearly 6 tons, a T-Rex could exert enough pressure to crumple the steel door of a modern car like it was tinfoil. He didn't just bite his victims, he shattered them. He was one of the few predators in history that could eat the entire animal, crushing through heavy ribs and leg bones to get to the rich, nutritious marrow inside. He was a recycling machine of muscle and bone. The strategist, not the beast. For decades, we debated, was he a noble hunter or a lowly scavenger? That's the wrong question. A true king is an opportunist. A T-Rex didn't care about honor. He cared about calories. If he found a dead carcass, he would claim it because it was free energy. If he had to hunt, he would ambush. Despite his size, he had forward-facing stereoscopic vision, better than a modern hawk. He could judge depth and distance with surgical precision. He wasn't a mindless brute running blindly. He was a strategist, waiting in the shadows of the conifers, timing his strike to minimize his own risk. Every apex predator today, from the great white shark to the CEO in a boardroom, follows this same Devonian-born logic. Don't work harder than you have to. Control the resources, eliminate the competition. The changing of the guard. But even kings must rest. As the golden Cretaceous sun dips below the horizon, the temperature begins to drop, just slightly. The humidity turns into a heavy, drenching dew. Rumble. The king settles into the deep ferns. His massive 9-ton heart slows its beat. But as he sleeps, the world he ruled doesn't stop. It changes hands. Skitter scatter. Out of the burrows, out of the hollow logs, come the night watchmen. Troodon, the brainiac of the dinosaur world, with eyes the size of golf balls, perfectly adapted to see in the pitch black. And Idelphodon, our distant furry ancestor, a small marsupial huddling in the cracks of a world dominated by giants. We think the T-Rex owned the world, but he only owned the day. At night, the world belonged to the small, the clever, and the feathered. While the king dreamt of his next kill, our ancestors were busy surviving the shadows, learning how to live in a world where being big was a death sentence. The night is thick with the croaking of primitive frogs and the rustle of unseen hunters. The stars are brilliant, unfiltered by the smog of a future that hasn't happened yet. But high above, carried on the stratospheric winds, there is a new scent mixing with the musk of the swamp. It's faint, it's acrid, it's the smell of a planet beginning to poison itself from within. The arteries of the land and the titans of the sky. The heat of Laramidia was not just a feeling, it was a force. But as we move deeper into the day, we find that the lifeblood of this continent wasn't the rain, it was the shining rivers. Roar. These weren't the polite, managed rivers of the modern world. Born from the jagged, rising peaks of the young Rockies, these rivers were loaded with volcanic ash and iron-rich sediment. They snaked across the plains like silver veins, creating vast swampy deltas that were the true engine rooms of Cretaceous life. The rivers as historians. Every flood was a click of a cosmic camera. Splash. When the monsoon rains came, the rivers would overflow, burying everything. A fallen triceratops, a clutch of eggs, a massive redwood trunk under a thick blanket of oxygen-poor mud. The tomb that gives life. We think of floods as destruction, but in the Cretaceous, floods were the only reason we know this world existed. Without that suffocating mud, the bones would have bleached in the sun and turned to dust. The very disaster that killed the individual preserved the memory of the species. Every layer of stone in the Hell Creek Formation is a page in a book written by water.
But lift your gaze from the mud. Look up into that hazy, pale blue sky. The air is so thick and warm that it feels like a second ocean. And in this ocean of air, a different kind of Titan ruled. On the coastlines, you'd see Pteranon, living kites with 20-foot wingspans gliding effortlessly on the thermal updrafts. They weren't birds, they were leathery winged reptiles, silent and graceful. But further inland, over the foothills of the mountains, a shadow would fall that could stop a dinosaur's heart. The giraffe of the sky, Quetzalcoatlus. Imagine a creature standing on the ground and its head is at the same height as a giraffe. Thud, thud. Now imagine that same creature unfolding wings the size of a private jet. This was Quetzalcoatlus. Biomechanics, the pole vaulter. For a long time, we couldn't figure out how something that big could fly. The secret? It didn't flap like a bird to take off. It pole vaulted. It used its powerful front limbs to catapult its massive body into the air. It was the apex predator of the sky, a flying nightmare that could stalk the plains and snatch a juvenile dinosaur with a toothless beak the size of a man. The silent empire beneath the waves. But the land and sky were only half the story. To see the true heart of this world, we have to look beneath the shimmering surface of the western interior seaway. Plunge. The water wasn't clear. It was a murky, nutrient-rich soup of plankton,
and patrolling this soup was the mosasaur, the marine tyrant. Think of a 60-foot-long torpedo made of pure muscle and teeth. A mosasaur wasn't a shark, it was a monitor lizard that had returned to the sea and become a god. It had a double-hinged jaw, allowing it to swallow prey whole, and a second row of teeth on the roof of its mouth. Once a mosasaur bit down, the only way out was down its throat. The ghost energy.
This murky sea is why your modern world has power. The trillions of microscopic organisms that fueled the mosasaur's kingdom died and settled on the seafloor, forming a thick organic layer. Millions of years of pressure turned that rot into the oil and gas reserves under the Great Plains. When you turn on a light, you are using the recycled power of a Cretaceous ocean. The scent of sickness. But even as the mosasaur hunts and the king stalks the forest, the wind is carrying a new message. Hiss. On the other side of the planet, in what is now India, the earth is bleeding. The Deccan Traps, a volcanic wound the size of France, is erupting. Not in a single blast, but in a slow, relentless pulse of lava and poison gas that will last for hundreds of thousands of years. The planetary fever. The air is beginning to fill with sulfur dioxide. The rains are becoming slightly acidic, stinging the leaves of the great magnolias. The global greenhouse is becoming a global oven. The world of the giants is already getting sick. Their immune system is failing. They don't know it yet, but the endless summer is becoming a fever dream. And then the star appeared. It is a peaceful afternoon in Laramidia. The humidity hangs low over the swamps, and the air is thick with the sweet, heavy perfume of magnolia blossoms. A herd of triceratops drinks from a slow-moving, silt-heavy river. High above, a pteranodon glides on a warm updraft, its shadow flickering across the turquoise waves of the inland sea. Life continues its ancient 150-million-year-old rhythm. It has no idea that the world has less than 1 minute left. The day the sky fell. It begins not with a sound, but with a light. A new star appears in the daytime sky. At first, it is a pinprick of impossible brightness, but it blossoms with terrifying speed. Within seconds, it is brighter than the sun itself, a second malevolent sun that casts sharp, unnatural shadows across the red rocks of the continent.
The physics of the assassin. This is the asteroid, a 10-kilometer-wide mountain of rock and metal screaming through the Earth's atmosphere at 20 kilometers per second. That is 60 times the speed of sound. It is moving so fast that the air in front of it cannot move out of the way. Instead, the air is compressed and heated until it becomes a column of plasma hotter than the surface of the sun. Flash. The asteroid strikes the shallow sea of the Yucatan Peninsula. From the perspective of Laramidia, 1,000 miles to the north, there is no immediate sound. There is only a silent, world-ending flash. The horizon erupts in a dome of pure white light, as if the sun had fallen from the sky and shattered against the ground.
the thermal pulse. The energy released in this single instant is 1 billion times more powerful than an atomic bomb. A wave of unimaginable heat, a thermal pulse, sweeps across the continent at the speed of light. The oven of air. We often think of the Big Boom killing the dinosaurs, but for the creatures of North America, the first killer was the air itself. The temperature on the ground leaps to over 300 degrees Celsius in an instant. The lush tropical forests of Laramidia, the endless green world, literally explode into a continent-spanning wall of fire. The air becomes an oven, flash-cooking any living thing that is not sheltered deep underground or underwater. The shaking of the world. Minutes later, the second wave arrives, the seismic pulse. Rumble. Crack! The impact hits the Earth's crust with such force that it triggers earthquakes of magnitude 11 or higher. These aren't just shaky ground events, these are planet-wide convulsions. In Laramidia, the great shining rivers reverse their flow. The ground liquefies. Mountains that had stood for millions of years simply crumble into the sea. The tsunami of Earth. As the shockwave travels through the western interior seaway, it creates a mega tsunami. A wall of water hundreds of feet high surges inland, scouring the coastlines of Laramidia and Appalachia, dragging the burning remains of the forests back into the deep, murky abyss. The Iridium Ghost. If you look at the geological record today, you will find a thin, dark line of clay, the KPG boundary. Inside that line is a heavy concentration of iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. That 1-inch line of dust is the gravestone of an entire world. It is the pulverized remains of the mountain that fell from space, mixed with the ash of the world it burned.
The long, cold night. The firestorm was brief, measured in hours. But what followed was a slow, agonizing winter. The impact threw trillions of tons of vaporized rock and soot high into the stratosphere. This dark inheritance didn't fall back down. It spread, encircling the globe in a thick, impenetrable shroud. The sun began to dim. Then it vanished. The photosynthesis freeze turned into a starless twilight that lasted for years. Sunlight reaching the surface was reduced by over 90%. The logic of starvation. Without sunlight, the plants, the green engine of the Cretaceous, stopped working. The forests withered. In the oceans, the plankton died off in a massive global collapse. The food chain domino. The great herbivore herds, the survivors of the fire, now faced an empty table. They starved in the darkness, and as the plant eaters fell, the king followed. The last stumble of the king. Imagine the last Tyrannosaurus Rex. He is a ghost moving through a gray, ashen landscape. The rich scents of the swamp are gone, replaced by the acrid smell of sulfur and decay. He is hungry, a deep, gnawing hunger that his 9-ton body cannot sustain. Thud.
His great legs, built to rule a continent, finally give out. He crashes into the cold gray dust. He takes one final ragged breath of poisoned air. It is not a roar, it is a weary exhalation. With his fall, the 150-year-long story of the dinosaurs reaches its final silent word. The age of giants is over. The sky is black. The world is freezing. It seems like the end of everything. But beneath the king's final resting place, in the deep, dark burrows of the earth, a different kind of heartbeat is thumping. Small, fast, warm. Thump, 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 thump. Our ancestors are waiting. They are the bunker dwellers, the seed eaters, the clever survivors who know that the darkness won't last forever. The king is dead, but the meek are about to inherit the ashes. The Midnight Gallery of the Seaway.
The land of Laramidia was a place of noise and heat, but the western interior seaway, that vast ocean splitting America, held secrets that were much older and much quieter. To understand the scale of this world, we have to go deeper than the mosasaur's hunting grounds. We have to sink until the turquoise water turns to a bruised purple, and then to a total, crushing black. Bloop, bloop. As you descend, the warmth of the Cretaceous sun fades. The pressure begins to mount, pushing against your chest like a heavy, invisible hand. Here, in the midnight zone of the ancient American Sea, the rules of biology were being rewritten. The bioluminescent frontier. We often think of the Cretaceous as a world lit by the sun, but thousands of feet down, life was creating its own light. Flicker. Imagine a school of Encodus, predatory fish with fangs like a saber-toothed tiger. In the darkness, they don't hunt by sight, they hunt by vibration and ghost light. They possessed rows of photophores along their bellies, glowing with a soft, eerie green light to mimic the faint shimmer of the surface, hiding their shadows from the monsters below. The sea of glass. On the floor of this seaway sat the glass sponge reefs. These weren't made of rock or coral, they were made of silica. Living structures of glass, intricate and fragile as a spider's web, stretching for miles. We think of glass as something man-made and delicate, but these reefs were the internet of the deep. They acted as a massive filtration system, cleaning the water and providing a silent, crystalline cathedral for thousands of species of crabs and shrimp that never saw the sun. The polar emeralds, America's frozen jungles. While the deep sea was a world of glass and darkness, the ends of the earth were a world of emerald night. Creak, crack. The world of 6 months' shadows. Imagine a forest of giant redwoods and dawn sequoias growing in the Arctic. Because the planet was so warm, there was no ice, but the Earth's tilt was the same. That means for 6 months of the year, this forest was plunged into total darkness. The wind here was different. It was cool, smelling of damp needles and ancient resin. The biomechanics of the Dark Hunter. Nanuqsaurus. Meet the polar bear of the dinosaur world. This was a cousin of the T-Rex, but it was smaller, built for the shadows. The logic of the eyes. While the T-Rex in Montana had eyes for the sun,
Nanuqsaurus had eyes that were proportionately much larger. It was an apex predator that specialized in the dark. The feathered king. To survive the Arctic nights, it wasn't covered in scales, it was covered in a thick, insulating coat of dark, downy feathers. Imagine a tyrant lizard that looked more like a giant, murderous owl moving silently through a forest of frozen ferns. Human link. Every time you put on a winter coat or turn on a lamp during a long winter evening, you are mimicking the adaptations that Nanuqsaurus perfected 70 million years ago. We are still using the same strategies to survive the tilt of our planet. The Great Migration, the living bridge. How did life survive the 6-month darkness? They didn't just hunker down, they marched. Thud, thud, thud. The great herds of Edmontosaurus were the greatest travelers in history. They didn't just wander a few miles, they performed a multi-thousand-mile grand loop. As the sun began to dip below the horizon for the long Arctic winter, they turned south. The social intelligence of the herd. This wasn't a mindless stampede, it was a coordinated, multi-generational mission. The old matriarchs led the way, their brains storing a map of the rivers and the stars. They were the navigators of the Cretaceous. We think of dinosaurs as slow or stupid, but to navigate a continent without a compass, through forests filled with T-Rex and over rivers filled with Deinosuchus, the 40-foot terror crocodile, required a level of social memory and communication that rivaled any modern elephant herd. Splash! Imagine the crossing of the Judith River. The water is deep, cold, and murky. Snort! The lead Edmontosaurus hesitates. She knows that in the shadows of the reeds, something is waiting. Something with a bite force even greater than a T-Rex.
Snap. The water erupts. This is the dance of the giants. It is a violent, necessary part of the world's rhythm. The river takes its tax in blood, and the rest of the herd moves on, their heavy footfalls echoing against the mountains as they push toward the warmth of the south. The stars are shifting above the Laramidian sky. The great grand loop of the herds is half finished. The deep-sea glass reefs are filtering the nutrients of a world at its peak. But as the millions of years tick by, the planetary fever we spoke of is worsening. The green killing machine of the forests is fighting against the volcanic poison of the Deccan traps. The stage is being set for the final act. The heat of the Laramidian afternoon is reaching its peak. The golden haze is so thick you can almost touch it. But as the great herds of Edmontosaurus march toward the horizon, we turn our attention away from the movers and toward the fortresses. This is the living tanks and the war in the shadows. While some dinosaurs relied on speed or numbers, others chose a different path: impenetrability. The masterpiece of armor, Ankylosaurus. Imagine a creature that is less of an animal and more of a moving bunker. This is Ankylosaurus. Thump, thump. Ankylosaurus didn't run, it didn't hide, it simply existed in a state of permanent defiance. Its entire back was covered in osteoderms, bony plates embedded directly into its skin, fused together like a suit of medieval plate armor.
Even its eyelids were armored. Biomechanics, the physics of the club. But the real masterpiece was the tail. At the end of a stiff, reinforced set of vertebrae sat a massive, bony club. Most people think of the tail club as a swinging mace, but the physics are much more precise. Researchers have used biomechanical modeling to show that a single swing from an adult ankylosaurus carried enough kinetic energy to shatter the shin bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex.
It was a spatial denial weapon. Ankylosaurus didn't need to kill the king. It just needed to make the king regret standing nearby. Crack. Imagine the sound of bone hitting bone, a sickening, resonant snap that would leave the greatest predator on Earth crippled and starving. The price of the suit. We think of armor as safe, but look at the metabolism. To grow that much bone, Ankylosaurus had to consume massive amounts of low-quality vegetation. Its entire body was a fermentation vat. Gurgle. Inside that wide barrel-shaped torso, a massive gut was working 24/7 to break down tough ferns. The tank was a slow-motion chemical factory, trading speed and agility for the ability to eat what no one else wanted and go where no one else dared. The hidden war. The rise of the furry opportunists. While the tanks and the kings fought their high-stakes battles in the sun, a far more important war was being fought in the dark, damp undergrowth. This was the war of the first mammals. Sniff, sniff. Meet Didelphodon. It looks like a cross between an otter and a badger, with a face full of whiskers and a set of teeth that would make a piranha jealous. Not the victims you think. We are often told that the first mammals were helpless shrews hiding in fear. Logic flip. The Cretaceous mammals were efficiency experts. While a T-Rex needed to find 1,000 pounds of meat a week, a Didelphodon could survive on a handful of snails, a beetle, or the scavenged toe of a dead Triceratops. The secret weapon, the high-speed brain. Mammals were developing something that dinosaurs lacked, an advanced sense of hearing and a neocortex. They were processing the world faster. In the dark, while the great reptiles were sluggish and cold, the mammals were on. Whirr. Their warm-blooded hearts were racing, allowing them to outthink and outmaneuver the giants. Every time you solve a complex problem or feel your heart race in the dark, you are using the survival kit that was perfected in the shadow of the Ankylosaurus. We didn't win by being bigger. We won by being faster computers.
The Good Mother. The nesting colonies. Let's travel to a place of surprising tenderness, the nesting grounds of Maiasaura. Chirp, chirp. In the vast, sun-baked floodplains, thousands of these good mother lizards gathered to build their nests. These weren't just holes in the ground. They were organized cities of mud mounds. The scientific case, the stress of the end. Paleontologists have found something haunting in these nesting grounds. In the final years before the asteroid, the eggshells of the Maiasaura began to change. They were getting thinner. The hidden sickness. This wasn't because of a predator. It was because of the Deccan traps, the volcanoes we spoke of earlier. The sulfur in the air was changing the chemistry of the soil, making it harder for the mothers to find the calcium they needed to build strong eggs. The tragedy. Even before the sky fell, the good mothers were struggling. They were tending to nests that were increasingly fragile, fighting a global fever that they couldn't see or understand. The empire was already trembling at its foundation. The afternoon sun is beginning to stretch the shadows of the ankylosaurus across the ferns. The air is still, the humidity heavy enough to drown in. The hidden war in the undergrowth is pausing as the light fades, waiting for the nocturnal shift to begin. But high above, the second sun, the asteroid, is only days away. The planet is at its most beautiful, most vibrant, and most doomed. The golden Laramidian afternoon is beginning to ripen into a deep, hazy orange. But as we move toward the edge of the great shining rivers, the endless summer starts to feel a little more sinister. This is the river tyrants and the buckling of a continent. While the Tyrannosaurus Rex was the undisputed king of the dry land, his authority ended at the water's edge. In the murky, silt-choked channels of the Laramidian river deltas, there was a different kind of absolute power. The terror crocodile, Deinosuchus. Imagine a crocodile. Now, stretch it until it is 12 meters long, the size of a city bus. Gurgle.
This was Deinosuchus. It wasn't just a big alligator, it was a specialist in killing giants. While modern crocodiles hunt zebra or wildebeest, Deinosuchus was built to hunt dinosaurs. The biomechanics of the death roll. If you were to X-ray its skull, you'd see bone as dense as granite. Its bite force was estimated at over 100,000 newtons. To put that in perspective, the T-Rex bit with about 35,000 to 57,000 newtons. The king's bully. We often think of the T-Rex as fearless. If a T-Rex came down to a river to drink, he did so with extreme caution. Splash. A Deinosuchus could lunge from the shallows with the speed of a strike team, latch on to the T-Rex's snout, and drag 9 tons of apex predator into the deep. In the water, the king was just another meal. Next time you see a small alligator in a pond, look at its eyes. You are looking at a design that hasn't changed in millions of years because it didn't need to. It survived the asteroid by doing exactly what Deinosuchus did, staying low, staying patient, and letting the world change around it. The last dance of the continents. While the monsters fought in the rivers, the very ground they were standing on was undergoing a violent transformation. This is what geologists call the Laramide orogeny. Crack. Deep beneath the surface, the tectonic plates were shallow subducting, sliding horizontally under North America rather than diving deep. This was a geological catastrophe in slow motion. The birth of the spine. This process was physically buckling the continent, pushing up the early Rocky Mountains. This wasn't just about scenery, it was about destroying the status quo. As the mountains rose, they began to drain the western interior seaway. The sinking heart. The great inland ocean that had split America for millions of years was beginning to retreat. Suck. Imagine millions of square miles of shallow sea turning into stagnant mudflats and then dry land. The liquid heart of the continent was evaporating, taking the mosasaur's kingdom with it.
The scent of disaster. The world was already unstable. Between the rising mountains, the draining sea, and the volcanic ash from the Deccan traps in the east, The late Cretaceous was an ecosystem on the edge of a nervous breakdown. Case study: the stressed king. Paleontologists have looked at T-Rex bones from the very end of the era and found signs of massive parasitic infections and bone diseases. The king wasn't just fighting other dinosaurs, he was fighting a changing world. The air was getting thinner, the food was getting scarcer, and the climate was oscillating wildly. The asteroid didn't hit a healthy planet, it hit a world that was already in the emergency room. Yes. The volcanic gases were creating a permanent haze. The sunset wasn't beautiful because of the light, it was beautiful because of the pollution. The sky is a bruised purple now. The Deinonychus has slipped back beneath the murky water, leaving only a ripple. The great herds are huddling together, sensing a vibration in the air that doesn't come from the ground. The grand dance of the Cretaceous is entering its final, desperate minute. The stage is buckling, the lights are flickering, and the second sun is about to take center stage. The orange haze of the Laramidian afternoon is now so thick it feels like walking through amber. But as we pull our gaze away from the crushing weight of the tanks and the tyrants, we find a world that is vibrating with a different kind of energy. This is the empire of the small and the feathered Ferraris. While the giants were fighting for the headlines, a much smaller, more intricate world was operating beneath their feet and above their heads. The ground crew, the insect revolution. If you were to sit perfectly still in a Cretaceous fern thicket, the first thing you'd hear isn't a roar, it's a hum, buzz, zip. The air, rich with 30% more oxygen than today, was high-octane fuel for the insect world. This was the era where the modern ground crew was born.
The architects of decay. For the first time, the Earth had termites. Scrape, scrape. Before termites, dead trees just sat there, taking forever to rot. Termites were the disruptors. They figured out how to digest wood, turning the fallen Archaeopteryx and conifers into nutrients almost instantly. They were the world's first waste management system. The flower hunters. This was also the rise of the first bees. They weren't just gathering honey, they were the navigators of the new colorful world we saw in Chapter 2. The real controllers. We think the T-Rex ruled the forest. If the insects stopped working for 1 week, the entire Cretaceous ecosystem would have collapsed under its own trash. The T-Rex was the hood ornament, the insects were the engine. The feathered Ferraris, Ornithomimus. In the open floodplains between the slow-moving herds of Triceratops, something else was moving, something that looked like a blurred line. Patter, patter, patter. This was Ornithomimus, the ostrich mimic. If the Ankylosaurus was a tank, Ornithomimus was a Ferrari. It was built for one thing: pure, unadulterated speed. Biomechanics, the power of the hollow. If you were to look inside an Ornithomimus bone, you'd see it wasn't solid. It was pneumatized, honeycombed with air sacs. This made them incredibly light and allowed for a high-speed respiratory system that functioned like a turbocharger. The strategy of not being there. They didn't have teeth, they didn't have armor. Their only defense was a top speed of nearly 70 kilometers per hour. In the time it took a T-Rex to take 2 heavy steps, an Ornithomimus was already 100 meters away, a feathered ghost in the golden dust.
Every time you see an ostrich or an emu running across a savanna, you are looking at the exact same chassis that Ornithomimus used to run circles around the king. The feathered transition, the bridge to the future.
But look closer at the Ornithomimus. Look at its skin. It wasn't just scales, it was covered in a coat of proto-feathers, soft, downy filaments that kept it warm and were used for vibrant, colorful displays. We think of feathers as tools for flight. The reality, feathers were the Cretaceous outfit. They started as insulation and social signaling, basically the fashion and heating of the dinosaur world. Flight was just a lucky side effect that happened much later. Chirp. The air was beginning to fill with the first true birds. They were smaller, faster, and more efficient than the giant leathery pterosaurs. They were the new money in the sky, snatching up the insects that the giants ignored. The sun is hanging heavy and red on the horizon now. The grand symphony is reaching its crescendo. The hum of the insects, the patter of the bird mimics, and the deep, distant rumble of the retreating sea are all blending into one final, beautiful harmony. The stage is perfect. Every actor is in their place. The king is on his throne, the mother is on her nest, the tank is in the brush. But the second sun has just hit the upper atmosphere. The countdown has reached its final seconds. The darkness of the Ash Age is finally beginning to lift. The thick, sulfurous shroud that strangled the sun for years is thinning, torn apart by the relentless high-altitude winds. For the first time in a generation, a beam of sunlight, weak, pale, and ghostly, pierces through the gray and touches the ground. This is the eternal echo. The great pruning, the fern spike. Look at the ground where the king once walked. It isn't a forest anymore. It's a sea of dull, repetitive green. This is what geologists call the fern spike. Crick-crack. When the world ended, the complex forests died first. But ferns are the ultimate opportunists. Their spores can sit in scorched, toxic soil for years, waiting for a single photon of light. For a century, North America wasn't a land of variety. It was a monotonous, continent-sized carpet of ferns.
The success of the boring. We praise the exotic and the complex, but in a catastrophe, complexity is a death sentence. The ferns survived because they were simple. They were the reset button for the planet's lungs. Our ancestor, the bunker dweller. In the shadow of a rotting triceratops ribcage, a tiny, furry head pokes out of the mud. This is Purgatorius. Sniff, sniff. It looks like a cross between a squirrel and a shrew, but look at its ankles. They are flexible. It can climb. This tiny, half-starved creature is your direct ancestor. The salty take, the garbage eater king. While the T-Rex died because it was too noble to eat anything but meat, Purgatorius survived because it was a garbage can with fur. It ate seeds, rotted insects, and fermented fruit of dying trees. The strategic retreat. Mammals won the world not because they were stronger, but because they were the ultimate preppers. They had been living in the emergency room for 100 million years, perfecting the art of staying small, staying warm, and eating garbage. When the giants left, the janitors took over the palace. The dinosaur in your garden. But wait, listen, chirp. The dinosaurs didn't entirely disappear. A few lines survived, small, feathered, and beaked. We look at a sparrow, or a chicken and think they are lesser than a T-Rex. The reality, the birds are the V3.0 of the dinosaur lineage. They kept the hollow bones, the high-speed metabolism, and the incredible vision, but they ditched the heavy armor and the 9-ton appetite.
Every time you see a hawk circle a field or a robin tugging at a worm, you are watching a modern raptor hunt. The tyrant lizard is gone, but the tyrant finch is right outside your window. They didn't lose the war, they just changed their strategy. The American mirror, then and now. Imagine standing in Montana today at the edge of the Hell Creek Formation. Whoosh! The wind is cool and dry. You see the rolling badlands, the gray and purple stripes of stone. The ghost geography. If you could layer the maps, you'd realize you are standing on the very spot where the Edmontosaurus herd once marched. The hills you see today are the fossilized mud of the rivers that once carried their bones. The energy loop. When you turn the key in your car, you are releasing the sunlight that fell on Laramidia. You are literally burning the liquid heart of the Cretaceous to move through the modern world. We are a civilization fueled by the ghosts of monsters. The final exhalation. The journey is over. The endless summer of the Cretaceous has faded into the long, patient history of the stone. The giants are gone. The mosasaur is a layer of limestone. The ankylosaur is a puzzle for a museum. The Tyrannosaurus is a memory that still makes our hearts race in the dark. Shh. But as you drift off to sleep, remember, you are not a stranger to this world. You carry the heat of the Cretaceous greenhouse in your warm blood. You carry the architecture of the Laramidian rivers in your veins, and you carry the resilience of the tiny Purgatorius in your spirit. The earth remembers everything. The ground under your bed was once a swamp. The air you breathe was once exhaled by a dragon, and the story of the giants, it lives on in you. The king is dead. Long live the king. Good night.